Hello, welcome to part 2, the second evolution video. This will go by much faster than the first one. So, the father of evolution was Charles Darwin, this guy over here. He is famous because he sailed around the world and studied birds. He wrote this book called Origin of Species, and he figured out that birds in different parts of on different parts of an island had different adaptations. Their beaks specifically looked different. And so he looked at all those different birds and tried to figure out why. So basically, he proposed something called the theory of natural selection. Basically, only organisms that are able to survive in their environment will reproduce. This makes sense, right? If an organism has some sort of mutation or adaptation where it makes them hard to eat food, hard to escape predators, hard to stay warm, they're not going to survive. So therefore, they're not going to produce offspring. So therefore, those genes, those traits that didn't work in those environments won't be passed on. So only the best traits will be passed on. Survival of the fittest. So Charles Darwin, theory of natural selection. This other theory of evolution was from this guy named Lamarck. I love this hairstyle. So he had what was called the theory of acquired characteristics. Basically, he proposed that traits that were picked up through life could be passed on to offspring. This was before Mendel's work with the pea plants. There wasn't really a great understanding of genetics. So he proposed this before Darwin, and then Darwin was like, nah, that's not what it is. So basically the difference, we have Lamarck's theory over here and Darwin's theory over here. Starts out with giraffes, and then basically Lamarck's theory, again, acquiring traits throughout your lifetime can then be passed on. So they get taller, and they pass that on to their offspring so that they can eat the leaves from the tall tree. If you're thinking that doesn't make sense, that's dumb, it is. That's why it was debunked, and we go by the theory of natural selection, which is, okay, so the shorter giraffes aren't getting the leaves from the tall trees, so therefore they're not surviving and they're not producing any short giraffes. So then the end product, again, over thousands of years, are only tall giraffes. All right, so Lamarck, theory of acquired characteristics, blah, and then Darwin, theory of natural selection, dope. Okay, so here are Darwin's finches. Again, just survivors have the traits that are suited for their environment. And I mentioned survival of the fittest. Fitness is the ability to survive and reproduce in your environment. So you want to be fit, your offspring, you want your offspring to be fit, not like big, strong, and bulky fit, but like, okay, you're able to reproduce, you're able to eat food, you're able to escape predators, those sorts of things. These traits are passed on to other generations, and natural selection increases genetic variation, okay, because it creates a selective advantage. So not all individuals survive and reproduce. So that's why there's a lot of genetic variation. And this natural selection, which increases genetic variation, will lead to a change in the population. Okay, so if you think about different types of birds, or different birds in different locations, and they eat different things, they're going to look different, right? Their morphology is going to look different. Their beaks are going to look different, okay? So then there's a greater genetic variation within that species of birds, depending on the location, right? They have different beaks. And this is helpful because not all that survive will reproduce. So the more the merrier. And eventually, the more and more there are of a specific organism with a specific trait, that will change the population. More species will have that trait because it works for that environment. I might have word vomited a little too much. Ask me tomorrow if any of this doesn't make sense. So that genetic variation can come from a few different things. Mutations, sexual reproduction definitely increases genetic variation because everything that is produced via sexual reproduction is going to end up genetically different than anything else, right? Because you get 50% of your DNA from mom, 50% from dad. So that's why even siblings, if you have the same parents, are completely different. So mutation, sexual reproduction, and something called gene flow. increases that genetic variation. So gene flow is literally the flow of genes, the movement of organisms from one population to another. So take these birds, we've got one population, maybe some moved over to this one, maybe some moved over here. That would create gene flow, and that would create increased genetic variation, because if we have a red bird from population B over by population A, there might be some interbreeding going on there, and that could create a different population. That could create some different genes and some different mutations, yada, yada, yada. So getting new species, this is a picture of speciation, becoming new species. This comes, let me back up. So organisms live based on their ability to survive. We've talked about that, right? Survival of the fittest. They need to be fit. They need to be able to have the best traits to survive in their specific environment. And different environments cause different traits to develop. So just like these birds right here, this beak is good for insect eating. This beak is good for insect eating in a tree, like a woodpecker. This is good for seed eating. It's nice and curved. They all have the same ancestor. But we get these new species because of environmental pressures. So then they eventually become new species, and then they can't breed with each other because they end up being so different. This is what Darwin observed. Okay, so there's two rates of speciation. We have gradualism and punctuated equilibrium. So gradualism is evolution just occurs at a slow, continuous rate, just like right here. And then punctuated equilibrium that is a hard word to say, is when evolution occurs not constant and kind of at an irregular rate. This could be due to some sort of environmental pressure. This could be due to something crazy that happened, like a meteor hitting the earth, or some type of natural disaster that wiped out a population and then they had to start it from scratch. So gradualism, gradual evolution, punctuated equilibrium. I cannot say that, you guys. Think of punctuated like poked, like something happened that disturbed the gradual rate of evolution so that it changed. Few things to remember. Evolution is not goal-oriented. It's not like, okay, we need to make this bird species look just like this. Not goal-oriented, because it cannot predict the environment. It is simply adapting with the environment, okay? Evolution is change over time. As time progresses, changes, the needs of those organisms might change. And evolution could happen, and then the environment could change, and then it needs to evolve again. So it's a constant process, not goal-oriented. So, of course, changing environments, as we've talked about, leads to evolution, but it can also cause extinctions, right? So some changing environments, think about those birds. If there's more seeds and insects, you're going to have more of those curved beaks, again, over a long span of time, not in just like a hot sec. But it can also cause extinctions. So if there's a volcano eruption or a tsunami or something, it can lead to mass extinction as well. So now only populations can evolve, not an individual. So an individual cannot, in its lifetime, develop an adaptation. Populations evolve because it takes so long, and it's those traits being passed down or the traits not being passed down. So it takes a lot of generations for the trait that is very detrimental for this species to kind of get out of the gene pool, and then they're all good. So it takes a long time. Populations evolve, not individuals. That's super, super important. Of course, evolution occurs over millions of years. Bacteria has been evolving forever. Antibiotic resistance is a huge thing. We can talk about that more in class. If you have any questions, holla at your girl. Let me know.